All right. Welcome everybody to the High Return Real Estate Show, the show for heavy hitters. And we've got a really amazing guest. I actually had the pleasure of meeting this man personally at a real estate investors event, probably maybe, 6, 8 weeks ago, and was really impressed with the information that he gave, and especially in light of what's happening with the coronavirus situation and what I feel is like we're kind of getting trounced on with our civil liberties and invasion of privacies and things like that. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today are ways to protect yourself from that. And this man comes from just an incredible background, and still probably a background that I would say is not conducive to being successful, which we're going to talk about, but has really become a very successful man and teaches a lot of other people some really cool concepts. So stay tuned. You're in for a really fantastic episode. Welcome to the High Return Real Estate Show, the podcast for heavy hitters. 2 men, 1 mission. It's time to build your empire. All right, welcome back, everybody. I have the pleasure of introducing a man who came from some pretty rough background. Father was an alcoholic, really no entrepreneurial blood in his family at all. He was kind of taught to just work for the man, and has really bucked the odds and is a heavy investor into single family homes. I think he's up to something over 200 now. But what's also interesting is he has become one of the leading experts in the world about land trusts. And before you say this is a really, that's kind of Shecky, that's so boring talking about land trusts, there's some really interesting stuff going on in this world. And I'm very pleased and happy to welcome Mr. Randy Hughes.
Hey, Shecky, glad to be here. This is great. Let's get started.
Yeah, I'm really excited because there's so many different ways we can go with this conversation. But I first want to ask, is there anything you want to fill in terms of my little loose bio that I gave about you?
Other than the fact that I'm a good-looking gentleman?
Well, for the people that are watching on YouTube and seeing the video versus the audio, it's very clear. But
it's obvious, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned it because the people that are audio only now know that too.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. The only thing I would add to that bio is that if maybe at the end of this conversation today, if people are wondering how I evolved the way I did in my thinking, it's because of that background where I had nobody to help me get started, no father image to loan me money or give me a house to get started with. And when you start from nothing, or maybe even less than nothing, like a negative net worth, and you work really hard for a long period of time to get something, it kind of makes you think, well, maybe I should protect these assets as I'm accumulating, because in this day and age, especially in America, the most litigious country in the world, there are a lot of jealous people out there that want to try to take those assets away from you after you work really hard to acquire them. And I don't want to go back to nothing. So early on in my career, I started investigating ways of holding title to real estate investments not in my name. And that's kind of the evolution of how I started thinking in privacy terms some 40 some years ago. And what's really funny, I'll tell you a quick story. When I started doing this, my own wife said to me, "Why are you doing this? Are you trying to hide something? Or are you doing something illegal, immoral, or fattening, or what's going on?" And now you fast forward 40 years to now, when you talk about privacy, everybody's ears perk up and they say, "Yeah, tell me more, because I've lost so much of my privacy. I want to try to get some back, and I need to protect my assets." So it's a much more popular subject now than it was decades ago.
Yeah. So, and you've been at this a long time and become very much an expert in the field. But a side comment, really, I mentioned that you are heavily invested into single family homes, and I'm more just kind of curious, like, why single family homes? Like, we're in that business too, and I get it, but I kind of want you to tell the listeners, like, why did you go down that road? Because we've had so many guests on this show that, like, well, I started with singles, I moved up to multis, small multis, then I went to big multis, then I went to there, then I, and they're certainly fantastic for their success. That's great. But oftentimes what happens is, in that evolution, the little single family home gets slammed in terms of the more glamorous stuff. And I'm wondering why you've stayed exclusively into the singles.
Well, actually, early on in my career, back, well, I guess it was kind of in the middle, in the late 80s and early 90s, I owned some apartment buildings on the University of Illinois campus. And what I learned was that the single family house fits my personality. And I always tell new investors, find something that fits your personality. Maybe, maybe houses are not for you. Maybe apartment buildings or Kentucky Fried Chickens or Walgreens are for you. But for me, I like the single family house. I sold all my apartment buildings in the early 90s because I hated 100% turnover every year. There are several people in our town that have become very wealthy investing in campus apartments. Not so sure they're happy about it right now, but over the past few years, they've made a lot of money, and more power to them. They've earned it. 100% turnover every year is not my lifestyle. I like to do things other than be a slave to my investment property. And my turnover ratio is about 20% a year. So that means 80% of my tenants stay in houses. Tenants in houses, their families tend to stay longer. They take better care of the property than student or apartment renters do. And it's just my kind of investment, and I love it. And I recommend it, but if it doesn't fit your personality, don't do it.
Yeah, okay, words of wisdom. I love it. And I tend to agree with you too. I mean, we like the lower turnover of the singles. We do some occasional duplexes. But when we first started doing this in this particular company, which was about 4 years ago, we were very seduced by tris, fours, fiveplex, eightplexes, that kind of smaller multi, because, obviously the argument being, well, it's all under the same roof. But managing those properties is so much more difficult, and there's so many more issues. And you did say quite a lot there, especially in terms of if you get a halfway decent, stable family in one of your singles, they're likely to stay for a few years. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's just, you just sleep a lot better at night. So I'm with you.
Can I make one other point there on that, Shecky?
Of course.
The value of a single family home isn't determined by how much you get for rent. And the value of an apartment building is. If your rents don't go up, your value doesn't go up. But obviously a single family house is driven by different factors. So when a home buyer comes in to buy one of my houses, and mom and dad say, oh, I love this kitchen and I love the backyard, they're going to pay a retail price. They don't say, how much does this house rent for? And so I think you get a greater leverage with a single family house than you do with multi-family units.
Yeah, it's a great point. And there's no question that you have a significantly broader exit strategies if you want to get out of it. Significantly broader. Yeah. So let's move more onto this main topic about land trusts. And what was I guess I'm kind of curious to go back to 40 years ago. And, you made this comment about, hey, I've worked hard to get where I'm at. I want to protect it. Was there some sort of event that happened that kind of woke you up to this?
That woke me up to wanting to invest in real estate?
No, what I'm saying is some event that happened with assumed exposure of what you had been building to say,
yeah.
I've got to figure out a way to protect what I've worked hard to build.
Yeah, I had probably 15 houses in my name personally before I woke up in the middle of the night and said to myself, wow, all somebody has to do is go down to the courthouse, this was before the internet, and look up what I own, what it's assessed for, and what my debt was when I bought the property. And with those three numbers, they can approximate my net worth. And the larger my net worth became, the greater target I became for a lawsuit, because the average citizen's view of a real estate investor is you're wealthy. You can be next to bankruptcy. You can be upside down with negative cash flow, almost ready to kill you. But your neighbors think, oh, he owns a 50-unit apartment building, or he owns 10 houses. He must be rich. Therefore, you're a greater target for a lawsuit just because of that psychology. So just by not owning this stuff in your name removes a whole lot of liability potential for you, because people don't perceive you as a person with lots of equity. Lawyers love to sue real estate people because they have hard assets. Cash, if they sue you and you got money in the bank, it tends to disappear. But your rental properties can't disappear so fast.
Right.
And I'm not talking about trying to avoid your just responsibilities in life. This is my 50th year in the business. I've never paid a mortgage payment late. I've never defaulted on a note. I've never gone bankrupt. I paid my bills. But if you're going to come after me for some frivolous lawsuit on something I'm not responsible for, you're going to get a battle, and it's going to cost you dearly. And I think I've got a right to feel that way.
Yeah, 100% agree. So let's start from the basics.
Okay.
What is a land trust? What is it?
Well, it's really just a few pieces of paper. You need two things to create a trust agreement, which is a contract between the trustee who holds title for you and you as the beneficiary. That contract is not recorded anywhere on the planet, and that's what gives you your privacy, your anonymity of ownership, because nobody knows who the beneficiary of a trust is. It's so funny. I get a call because if you type in land trust into Google, you're going to get me. And I have my phone number, my office phone number in there. And so I get calls every week from people saying, is this the Virginia Land Trust? Is this the George Swanson Land Trust? And I say, no, it isn't, but why are you calling? Well, there are dogs barking across the street, and I want to get a hold of the owner and complain. I'm going to call the cops. And all kinds of complaints come in, and they say, how can I find out who the owner is? And I tell them, you can't. That's the reason why they have it in trust, is so you can't find them. All you can do is send a letter, an old-fashioned snail mail letter, to the address on the deed, and if they want to respond, they will, and if they don't, they won't. And every time I get one of those calls, it reinforces the benefit of using these trusts, because the world's getting crazier and crazier, especially if you're a property manager. It's really crazy out there for some tenants that are going wacko. I mean, I've been a landlord for 50 years, and for 20 of those years, I had two little girls growing up in my house. And the last thing I needed was some guy I was evicting to come knocking at the door and my 7-year-old daughter answered.
Yeah.
So there's some really serious issues here, especially for us property managers. And I encourage you, don't own this stuff in your name. You will live to regret it.
So, and I 100% agree. Let me go back to this other question. So what is it? You basically said there's two pieces of paper. The first one is a trust agreement, which names the beneficiary. And that's a private document that's not recorded anywhere. What's the second document?
The second document is called a deed to the trustee, a deed in trust. And it's very much like a warranty deed, but it's got a little bit of extra language in it. And some of that extra language says that the beneficial interest in the trust is personal property. So when you take your real estate and take it out of your name and put it into a trust, you don't own real estate anymore. You own personal property. The trust owns the real estate. And why that's important is there are two different sets of laws. Real estate law and personal property trust law. Personal property law is different, and we don't really have time to get into the differences here, but just trust me, it's different, and it really makes a huge difference for us folks that like to sell real estate on an installment contract. Huge difference.
So that brings up an interesting question when you use the word installment contract. One of the things I am very curious about is, we build a portfolio, and occasionally we have some investors that actually hold the mortgage. Like they loan us long-term money, and they're not interested necessarily in owning property. They just want to get a check every month. And I understand that, nothing wrong with that. There's lots of different areas to invest in real estate. Some people want to be the owners, some people want to just have the note. So if I, let's say as an investor, own a piece of property, let's say in the name of my LLC, and I go and it's all recorded and everything in my LLC, and now there's a note on that. I offer an investor a mortgage, private investor, and say, hey, you're going to get, X% for 20 years, and I'm going to make payments every month. You're in first and only lien position. Can I still implement a land trust after that event? And if so, what do I need to let the note holder know, if anything?
Well, the note holder in your example is like a mortgage, like a bank, right?
Yes, but private, yes.
Private. Well, let's back up here a minute. First off, I would never tell you to own real estate in an LLC, because unless you form that LLC in Wyoming and I believe New Mexico, those are the only states that don't publish the owners of LLCs. And so if you're putting it in an LLC, you have no privacy. So you're right back to owning it in your name effectively from a public standpoint. Secondly, I would never put the real estate in an LLC because you're tempted to put more than one piece of real estate in the LLC.
Yep.
Never do that. Don't put all your assets. I mean, remember what Grandma and Grandpa taught us? You don't put all your eggs in one basket. Well, you don't put all your real estate in one entity, not one land trust, not one LLC, or not one corporation. You put each property into a separate trust, so they're all insulated from each other. Then make the beneficiary of those trusts your LLC. That way you have anonymity of ownership and you have separation of assets at the ownership level, which then makes it much easier for you to deal with your private lender, because he's going to make a loan on one property held in one trust. You'll give him a mortgage. He'll be just as secure as as if it wasn't in a trust. Because you're going to give him a mortgage and you're going to sign a note, which is your pledge for payment and your guarantee. And so he's just as secure, probably more secure having it that way, because the title to that real estate held in a trust is going to be protected from any liens or judgments. So there's just so many reasons to use the trust and not put your name on the deed or put it into an LLC or a corporation as far as titling. You still want the benefits of the LLC, the asset protection benefits, but you'll get those at the beneficiary level as the beneficiary of the land trust.
Got it. Okay. So the land trust basically comes in front of the LLC first, not the other way around.
Correct.
Okay. That's an important distinction. So
yes.
When I go out and make an agreement with an investor to loan me money for that, I'm basically saying you are loaning Land Trust XYZ the money for this property, and then Land Trust XYZ names my LLC as the beneficiary.
Right. Although technically they're really loaning you the money because you're going to sign the note and personal guarantee, and the land trust is just the trustee of your land trust will sign a mortgage which collateralizes your loan.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's good. It's a very, very important distinction.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious then, what are you seeing in terms of, I know you teach this stuff and you have a lot of students out there, and that's great. What are you seeing in terms of some of the real life events that are being thwarted as a result of this kind of setup? Like, it sounds to me like you're basically, I mean, to use maybe a negative word, and I don't mean it this way, but you're proselytizing right now. You're saying, hey, this is the Bible of how you set up this kind of ownership. You want to have all this stuff in place for every single bit of real estate that you own. And not one piece of real estate, not more than one, should ever be owned in in an individual land trust. You should have a separate land trust for each and every piece of property that you own. So that's a blanket statement all the way across the board. And it's a strong statement. I'm not challenging it. What I'm asking is, number one, why? Number two, how is that played out in the real world in terms of, potential attacks that you have seen both on yourself and your students, in terms of, getting access to your assets?
Well, let me answer that in several ways. If you talk to any asset protection specialist, even unrelated to real estate, they're going to tell you that a basic tenet of asset protection is separation of those assets. You don't combine your cash and your stock and your retirement program in one entity, because one attack gets everything. I always teach my students that don't own anything together with your spouse or significant other either. And that's a separation of assets too. I mean, let's say my wife and I own everything together one way or another through the LLCs or trusts or whatever, but effectively at the bottom of the pile, we own everything together jointly. And you sue me and you win and you get it all. I can't live off zero. But if I own half and she owns half, and we don't mix any of our assets together, and you sue me, you're going to get half maybe, but maybe I can live off of her half. So it just makes common sense to not bundle your assets in any one entity. Now, the way this works is we're effectively putting out hurdles. Most of the threat comes from contingency fee lawyers and their clients. And they like easy, they don't like hard. So, as I said before, just by not owning this stuff in your name will help you avoid a lot of problems. I'll give you a prime example. In the year 2000, I sold a house that my wife and I and my two daughters lived in. And it was in a trust. And 6 months after closing, I got a letter from the buyer's attorney. And it said, my buyer had to replace an air conditioner and some wood flooring and all the toilets in the house. And if you'll just send us a check for $8,000, we won't sue you. I mean, is this ludicrous or what? Are we responsible for maintenance on a house after we sell it? I mean, this is just a shakedown, and it happens every day, and they just send these letters out, and they make lots of money from threatening people and intimidating people. But I wasn't willing to play the game. So I sent him a letter back, and I said, dear Mr. Lawyer, I'd suggest you check your files before you threaten to sue somebody. I was not the owner of the property. Did you see my name on anything? Did you see it on the seller disclosure? Did you see it on the listing agreement? Did you see it on the termite report? Did you see it on the HUD-1? Did you see it on the deed? And he sent me a letter back and said, well, no, I checked my records, but my client said you lived there. Well, some people in America live in houses they don't own, right? So I sent him a letter back and I said, oh, and he said, he went on in his letter, being Mr. Tough Guy, and he said, so if you'll just tell us who the owner was, we won't sue you. So I sent him a letter back and I said, you know what? I think it was owned by some kind of a trust. And I'm not sure how they work, but my last sentence said, good luck. And you know what, Shecky? You know what happened?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
What does that tell you? Nothing. Didn't even have the courtesy to write me back and cuss me out.
Well, that's extra billable hours that he's not getting paid for.
Exactly. So, you know, I envisioned the conversation that he had with his client when he got that last letter. And he said, hey, Bob, this guy's not going to be as easy to extract money out of as the last 10 people we sent this letter to. What do you want to do? You want to spend some money chasing him? And Bob said, heck no. I'm not in this game to spend money. Let's go sue somebody that owns real estate in their name. And that's exactly what they did. So
what you speak to is, yeah, sorry, I'm just saying this kind of stuff, this sort of the ambulance chasers, let's say, of the real estate world, this goes on every day in America. I mean, this is common legal practice. It's essentially a legal form of extortion.
Right. And it's going to get worse. This coronavirus thing, you're going to see lawsuits like you've never seen them before. There are going to be tenants suing the owners of the property because they got COVIS, or at least they claim they did. You're going to find these lawyers are going to come up with all kinds of new and creative ways of suing us. So if you haven't been using trusts and you got by, congratulations. But I would not recommend you owning this stuff in your name going forward, because it's going to get really rough out there.
So in that that exchange with that attorney and them looking at all the different paperwork and everything, wasn't your signature on anything in terms of like being a beneficiary or anything like that?
No. They didn't have to see my trust. They didn't have to see my trust. All they got at closing was the deed. They gave us the money, and the money went to the beneficiary of the trust, outside of their knowledge, but from the title company, and they got the deed, and that's all they're entitled to. They're not entitled to see my trust.
So in terms of, like the standard American title company, this is not any kind of unusual situation for them. They're just recording the deed as a normal part of process. If you tell them it's held in a land trust, they just look at it and go, okay, well, this is the seller, is the land trust.
Well, yeah, the title, if you're using a title company on this, they're going to want to see either a copy of the trust, proving, who's really in control. They're going to want to see a letter of direction telling the trustee to sign the deed. And they verify everything. There are checks and balances here to make sure that, for example, so your trustee doesn't steal your property. But if you're dealing with, Chicago Title in particular, they're the ones that I always use. They're the largest title company in America. They actually have a land trust trustee department. They manage over 65,000 land trusts in America. So they're very familiar with the process. And I always use them, and things go pretty smooth. At least that's when I'm selling for cash. Now, if I'm selling on an installment contract, I don't use a title company. Now, there's no need to. I've got a closing this Friday, May 1st, and I'm selling a property on an installment contract. And I do that. I'm selling the beneficial interest on an installment contract, which, as I mentioned earlier, is personal property. And I do that at my attorney's office. And the buyer comes in, and I go in, and we have an official closing. And my attorney is my escrow agent, and he keeps all the documents. So if I die or go crazy or disappear, my buyer can perform and get title to the property.
Right. Now, this stuff goes beyond just real estate, does it not? Like if you, for example, if you own an automobile, and that automobile is, used for work. Maybe it's not even used for work. I don't know, but I mean, yeah. Can you wrap the title of, say, an automobile into a land trust?
Well, not into a land trust. And I teach real estate investors how to create land trusts for their real estate assets. All kinds of real estate assets, including air rights and mineral rights, options and contracts. But a personal property needs to go in a personal property trust, and that's different than a land trust that holds real estate assets.
Got it.
So I teach. I have a basic land trust course that I teach to people all over America, real estate investors, and it teaches them how to create the trust and has all the forms they ever need. Now, if you want to get more interested, I've been teaching that for 20 years, and probably 2 or 3 years after I started teaching the basic course, I had many students come back and say, "Hey, this is great stuff. Can you teach me more?" So I wrote an advanced course, and in the advanced course are more asset protection techniques, including a personal property trust agreement. So you can put your car, your boat, your motorcycle, your shotgun, your hammer, anything you're going to loan to your neighbor and he's going to hurt himself with and sue, you can put that in a personal property trust. So in my opinion, you shouldn't own anything in your name personally.
So you've been doing this for a long time. You've been teaching this for a long time. If I wanted to go, or anybody of our listeners wanted to go and find this course or learn from you, is this an online course? Do you send them a binder? Do you jump on a webinar with them? How does that work?
Well, actually, it comes in two forms. One is a pure downloadable with videos and audios and me teaching the material to a live audience. So It's kind of like, taking a seminar without having to pay for it and traveling to it. So you can go pure download, although probably about half the people want an actual hard copy of the course guide. So if you want a hard copy, I produce that and mail it to you along with a USB key that also has all that information, and all the forms are electronic, so you don't have to retype them. And then I have something I formed 10 years ago called the Land Trust University. So I'm a little bit ahead of the curve on this teaching online stuff.
Yeah.
All my material is online. You can study it module by module. So you study a little bit, and then you take a little test, and you study a little bit, and you can watch me on the video teaching that module. It's really cool, and it's like a real live university. So I put a lot of effort and a lot of money into this, the university. And I also do a monthly coaching call for my university students. Once a Saturday morning, once a month, we talk at 11 o'clock Central Time for an hour, and we talk about subjects like this last 2 months have been real popular. I normally have about 40 or 50 students on those calls. The last 2 months, I've had over 100 on each of the calls. So everybody's concerned about the virus and how it's going to affect their real estate investments. So,
Sure.
And just one other thing, Shecky, I'm the only guy on the planet writing a land trust newsletter. And so all my land trust members get my newsletter on a bi-monthly basis.
So you said that you've got you can put up a screen with all those links. I mean, I want to put all this in the show notes. I'm not as concerned about the advanced course, but I think the other stuff that I'm not, minimizing that. There we go. So you've got land trusts, plural, made simple, landtrustsmadesimple.com. And then your email is randy@mrlandtrust.net.
Right.
Awesome. Okay. And that's that URL is where you can find the course.
Right. And a lot of free information about land trusts. In fact, there's a phone number on there that you can text the word reasons to and get a free booklet from me that has over 50 reasons to use a trust. And that's free. So go to the website and download that and read it. And there's a whole bunch of free information on the website. And I will say this, I'm kind of old-fashioned when it comes to service. I feel like if somebody buys something from me, I owe them service. I don't know about you, Shecky, but anytime I buy anything anymore, the service is terrible.
Yeah.
Nobody answers their phone. Nobody calls you back. They want you to waste time, an hour of your time figuring out how to get to their customer service on their website.
Yeah, you can unshare that screen now, but we'll put that in the show notes links. But I agree with you, and I want to let people know that right before the recording of this session that we're doing right now, I had a question. I wanted to call you right before we started, right? And so I just dialed your number thinking I'm going to get some assistant or voicemail or whatever. And you picked up the phone,
I answer
it's fantastic. Like it's just a rare thing these days. And I want to applaud you for that. I think it's great. And, to walk the talk and to be accessible and all that kind of stuff. So my favorite question really and I'm probably am going to put you on the spot a little bit is, what is the question that I didn't ask that maybe I should have?
Well, I kind of go through objections in my PowerPoint presentation when I speak. I spoke 33 times last year to RIAs, our real estate investment clubs. And I put up one of my slides is, why shouldn't I do this?
Yeah.
And one of the items on that slide is it's extra paperwork. And that's true. It is. You got to prepare the trust, and you got to know who your trustee is going to be and come up with a name for your trust. So it's extra paperwork. But I always say, how important is your net worth? Is your net worth worth a little extra paperwork? I'd like to think so. And it's a heck of a lot easier to do this as you're building your estate than it is to go back like I mentioned earlier, I had 15 houses in my name before I figured out how to do this. And so I had to go back and retrofit all those 15 properties. So it's just a lot easier and smarter to do it from day one. And then there's no record of it ever being in your name. Now, if it's in your name now, there's nothing you can do about it. Get it out of your name for all the reasons that you can find in that booklet with 50 reasons in it. But going forward, the smart way to buy real estate is to take title directly from the seller to your trust. And that way you're never in the chain of title. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. And look, you're to an extent preaching to the choir here. I mean, the fact that guys like you are available, phone numbers, you're out speaking 30 times a year. I mean, there's a certain publicness to your life, right?
Right.
As with us too, right? I mean, we've got a well-known turnkey company. We've got a well-traveled website. We've got a podcast. Like everybody knows who we are. Not everybody, but enough people. And I think guys like us, to an extent, are targets.
More of a target than just the regular real estate investor. You're right. You're
Yeah.
right. And let me make one other point here, Shecky, before we run out of time. Out of those 33 times I spoke last year, I'll bet you every one of those audiences had at least one person that stood up and said, "Hey, Randy, why do I need to protect my assets? I just buy more insurance. I'll get an umbrella policy." And I always answer, I say, look, insurance is good. Buy all you can afford, but don't rely on it to be there when you need it. It seems like there are lots of exclusions. So read your policies to see what's not covered. Let me give you a prime example. So the first phone call I made when the world came to an end 6 or 8 weeks ago about this virus was to my State Farm agent. And I said, "Hey, buddy, been paying you premiums for 40 years. I've got business interruption. My business is interrupted. And I've got business interruption insurance, so I want to make a claim." And he said, "Well, sorry about that, but that's excluded." And I said, "Really? 40 years, I finally need you, and it's excluded." Boy, did that just ring true with what I've told everybody for 20 years is don't rely on insurance exclusively. Buy it, but don't rely on it. It's just one leg of a stool of your asset protection stool. Let's call it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I'm curious, why was it excluded? I mean, what's the,
pandemics are excluded. Read your policy.
yeah, pandemic. Okay.
Yeah.
So-called pandemic. Yes.
So-called, yes. Yeah, that's another story.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, Randy, this has been fantastic. I really want to thank you for coming on the show and for imparting all your wisdom and, all the years of experience. And I hope that, the listeners take heed and use this information to protect themselves. I mean, we deal with investors all the time. We talk to investors all over the world, really. Obviously at different stages of investment, some more successful than others, some have been at it longer than others. But in every case, we're all in the same boat, right? We're all working towards building a future, towards building a legacy, towards, to an extent, buying or engineering, maybe a better word, our freedom. It's ironic that this conversation is happening during a period with some pretty significant losses of freedom. But it really rings true. We need to do everything we can to protect the freedoms that we are engineering. And so I hope that this message resonates with the listeners, because I think it's a really, really important conversation right now, especially in light of what's happening around the world. So again, thank you. And that's a wrap. Great show.
Thank you, Shecky. Talk to you later.
Yeah.